I have uncovered the great cover story conspiracy in One Piece because it turns out that Oda, sneaky as he is, has been hiding the entire truth about everything we've been learning recently in plain sight from the very beginning of the story, including the flooding of the world, ancient technology, and even the ancient past of the One Piece planet. Just as an example, did you know that we already saw the Iron Giant Emeth all the way back in chapter 250? That's during Skypiea, which probably doesn't surprise anyone since, Skypiea kind of continues to retroactively be the single most important arc, apparently, which, kind of tough to swallow for the people who really don't like the arc. But getting back to topic, Emeth makes his first appearance in Wapol's cover story of all places. If you take a look at the first page of the chapter, you can see some toys that Wapol made with his Munch Munch fruit. And if you look really closely, right here, you can see that one of these toys looks a whole lot like our Iron Giant. It's got the mouth thing, it's got the glowing eyes, not similar enough quite yet for you. Well, in chapter 254, he has an updated design that looks even more like Emeth. Wapol even gives it the name Tetsuro, and it's got the same faceplate and glowing eyes just as the original. Now, you could play devil's advocate and say that Oda just likes to draw robots that way, but there are a lot of cyborgs and other robots in One Piece, lots of them. Oda really likes them, and this design is pretty unique within the entire story. And if it turns out that an ancient user of the Munch Munch fruit was the one responsible for the creation of Emeth or, other similar ancient Iron Giants, I'm gonna lose my mind, man. And this just keeps getting more interesting, as in the cover page of chapter 255, we do see little Tetsuro here once again when a scientist discovers that it's actually made of a very special new alloy that gets dubbed Wapo metal. It's an incredibly powerful shape memory alloy that's used to build all types of things, including, by the way, the General Frankie. And you wouldn't even know any of that if you hadn't been paying attention to the cover stories. And if you just watch the anime, for example, you might not even know that these things are a thing. And if you actually don't know, the cover stories are serialized side adventures that tell us what characters have been up to behind the scenes of the main story. We get to see what happens to a lot of the series villains, for instance, after they're defeated, and most of the time it preps them for re-entry into the story at a later point. So you might just have realized that you might have been missing out on huge parts of lore and important parts of the story, since Toei, for whatever reason, has straight out neglected to animate most of these cover stories, even though they put so many other fillers in the anime. If you're curious, in Wapol's case, he's able to reinvent himself as a business tycoon and found the evil Black Drum Empire, which is why he was able to re-enter the story during the Reverie, where he's now chilling with Vivi and Big News Morgan, and is one of the very few characters who's actually seen Imu and lived to tell the tale. And to think that it's all because of a crazy case of the munchies. Kinda ironic. And we've known for a long time that Oda places massive lore drops in some of these cover stories, but I've realized that if we take an extra close look here, we'll find that Oda's actually been feeding us the entire truth behind the Void Century in all of these cover stories for many, many years. So I've scoured all 19 existing current cover stories to see what secrets they hid, and I was absolutely shocked to see how much might have actually been in these. And I want to start here with a major revelation we just had during Egghead Island, that the One Piece world experienced a worldwide flood. And it turns out that Oda has already shown us that, and tons of us never even properly noticed, though shout out to a few people online who actually totally did catch the thing ahead of time a couple of years ago. And we have two cover stories that specifically deal with the underwater excursions of former Sun Pirates, so let's go Little Mermaid mode for the moment and head under the sea. The first one is the takoyaki master himself, Hachan. And in Hachan's seafloor stroll, we're introduced to Keimi and Papag, by the way, these two characters, way before we ever get to meet them during Saba Odi Archipelago. But we also get a lot of early hints that civilization underwater is a lot more complex than we all originally thought. Hachan goes on to meet a panda shark who owns technology like a refrigerator, an oil lamp, and waterproof wall calendar with pictures of bodacious mermaid babes. How does he even have all of this, and who makes that stuff? I have no idea. This shark does not even have hands. Now, Hachan also returns a ring to the princess of a goldfish empire, and those aren't fishmen or merfolk, these are just straight up goldfish with entire civilizations down at the bottom of the ocean. But what strikes me the most in this entire cover story is that Hachan eventually obtains a map to an undersea treasure, which ends up being the perfect takoyaki cooking sauce. But it's not the sauce that interests me here. I mean, it's a little bit, but not for this video. It's the map, because such a map existing would imply that the seafloor itself has been completely charted, right? But Arlong suggests in the Arlong Park arc that fishmen are not naturally as good at cartography as humans, hence why Arlong used Nami, you know the story, for her map-making abilities. So could this random treasure map here actually be a remnant of the ancient civilization from when what's currently under the seafloor actually used to be above the surface? Is that why we have under the sea all this technology and civilization? Seems a little bit fishy to me. But this was very early. All of this happened all the way back during the Alabasta arc, but by the time we get to the solo journey of Jinbei, the first son of the sea, the series is already in Dressrosa, and Oda was ready to reveal way more about the secrets of the One Piece world than before, which also, just gotta say real quick, it's kind of wild how Alabasta and Dressrosa already have so much in common as arcs, but then Oda also said, hold on, let me cook even more here, and also had 2 different cover stories featuring fishmen exploring the seafloor and teaching us more about the lost continents and kingdoms under the ocean. Gotta give it to the man. All right, it's now over to the big boy himself, the current Straw Hat, Jinbei. Now, Jinbei's cover story deals with him finding some ancient underwater ruins that were tossed up on land by Wadatsumi, who, by the way, is this giant sea monster you might remember, and in those ruins, he finds a poneglyph that he later actually gifts to Big Mom. You might remember that from the anime, which is, you know, what he gifts her to appease her, I guess. But clearly, if there was a poneglyph there, those ruins were probably up on the surface at some point before the world was flooded. But not only that, there is an even crazier clue hidden in these pages, because on the cover page for chapter 757, we see an old building that's now part of an underwater village. It's been knocked on its side, but above the doorway, we can very clearly see a paw print symbol, just like the ones you probably, realize the two, just like the ones associated with Kuma's pawpaw fruit. But also, we have plenty of clues that this symbol might be connected directly to the ancient kingdom in some way as well. Because at this point, I'm pretty certain that the flag of the ancient kingdom is a circle surrounded by 8 slightly smaller circles, and we do see the same motive remixed in pretty much every civilization that we assume was once allied with the ancient kingdom or Joy Boy. We have the Alabasta flag, the Kozuki crest, the Shandian shield, and King Neptune's tattoo. All of these, and even more like the Buccaneer shirt, there's lore. Like, all of these kind of point to this being the symbol. And the paw print is also super similar if you look at it, just with 3 dots instead of 8. So could this specific symbol be tied to the ancient kingdom as well, or even directly to Kuma's race, the Buccaneers? But we're not done with Jinbei's cover story, because there's something even more crazy hidden in it, because he only finds this lost underwater city that was protecting the poneglyph after he comes to this floating shrine where the inhabitants of the island worship the sea god, the very same sea god also worshipped on Skypiea as part of the 4 deities that the sun god Nika is also part of, and the same sea god that we learn about in the legendary Harley text that we see on Elbaf with the exact same kanji used. Another massive hint, I would argue, that next to Luffy's sun god powers, the other 3 gods of the sea, the forest, and the earth are also very real, and we will meet them someday in the story too. So, in both Hachan and Jinbei's cover stories, we do see very clear hints that the One Piece world was flooded, and that there are the remains of an ancient civilization that's now completely submerged on the sea floor. But thanks to that rising sea level, the One Piece world has to deal with some absolutely horrible weather, like the Agua Laguna. Does that count as weather? I'm not sure. The after effects of which are shown in CP9's backstory. Yeah, they got one too. During CP9's independent report, the government spies end up on an island near Water 7, and during most of that cover story, it's raining super hard for several days on end, and nowadays, we do know way more about why this weather is so awful. You see, after Imu wiped the Lulusia kingdom off the map, the ancient weapon Uranus left a massive hole that looks suspiciously like the one that we also see under Enies Lobby. And that kingdom's deletion was accompanied by some similarly terrible weather and a rise in the sea level, just like Water 7 has to deal with as it sinks Venice style deeper and deeper into the ocean. Now, due to all this rain, the CP9 agents even have to pay for Lucci's extensive medical treatment with soaking wet money, because basically everything here is soaking wet after the Agua Laguna happens. And another quick note is that we see this island's architecture, which has the most important buildings raised really up high on the most elevated part of the island to, you guessed it, avoid the rising ocean, and this is a very common reoccurring feature on tons of One Piece Island, and now thanks to Vegapunk's speech on Egghead Island, we do know why. Once again, it was all hidden in plain sight all along, and the most important buildings and castles needed to be built on the highest points of their islands or countries at that point, because those were the safest from the rising sea levels. Everything that's an island now in the One Piece world used to be mountain peaks. Think about that. And other than continuing to build your city up higher and higher like Water 7, what are some other ways that people are trying to combat those rising sea levels? Well, during the Straw Hat separation arc, we do see two different ways. First, in Robin's timeskip side story, we do see the giant bridge Tequila Wolf, where Robin joins up with the revolutionaries to liberate the slave laborers there. Tequila Wolf and the 3 other bridges have been under construction for over 700 years, but why? Well, now in the story, we do know that it's because the world government wanted to build 4 of these bridges to connect land masses very high and safe above the sea level, very likely because Imu already knew that the sea would continue to rise as they continue to use the ancient weapons. Then in Nami's side story, in the cover story, she hangs out on Weatheria, where a bunch of scientists are hanging out on a sky island researching the weather. But have you ever thought about why these weather wizards decided to hang out in the sky? By the way, that was my 5th time trying to say that sentence. Anyways, at first I thought, well, they're probably up there because the sky is where the weather happens. Duh, but you know, in retrospect, these old wizards are probably the most likely people to actually have realized that the One Piece world has an impending climate apocalypse, which is why they'd want to set up shop in the safest place in the world, up in the sky. And now that they've linked up with their buddy Dr. Vegapunk, they could definitely be using their scientific experience in metrology to look for, like, maybe solutions or ways to save the world from the brink of destruction. And in that context, I do also have to wonder if Karibu's cover story, the Kehihihi in the New World, also hints at some climate apocalypse as well, because the island where he confronts Kaido's subordinate Scotch for some reason has all the ground and trees wrapped up in bolted down metal. Now, I gotta say, I'm not really sure how that would prevent a climate apocalypse, but what I do know is that the cover page of chapter 700 has a factory that to me looks so much like the ancient city that is depicted in the mural on Elbaf here. That's right, baby. It is now mural piece time. You thought I could make it through a single video without talking about the craziest panel of the last 10 years? Yeah, no way. And if you know anything about the cover stories, you do know I have to talk about Enel's great space mission. And this is very much the poster child for any cover story giving huge lore drops and being way more important than just a silly little side adventure. In case you don't know, Enel's cover story sees him flying the Arc Maxime successfully to the moon, or as he likes to call it, the Fairyverse, and there he meets a bunch of robot automatons, and we get confirmation of straight up space pirates being a real thing in One Piece, in case you didn't know that. Now, after giving those pirates a nice electrocution, Enel finds an ancient underground city on the moon and powers up long forgotten ancient technology with his electricity devil fruit. There, he finds a whole army of little robots that are presumably at his command now, which makes me super excited for whatever Enel is gonna do when he comes back into the story, maybe, because we know he's going to, right? But while checking out this ancient city, he also found lots of wall paintings and old murals that told the history of this mysterious moon civilization. And what it showed was the winged races building the automatons and depictions of what a lot of theorists think could be the 3 ancient weapons and the mother flame here. Moreover, it turns out that the city was called Burka, which is the same name as the sky island that Enel and his priests were originally from. And there was also a message showing that the winged races left the city on the moon in search of more resources because they ran out on the moon and came down to the blue planet. So, alright, there's a ton to take in here. Enel's cover story basically changed everything that we thought we knew about One Piece. It confirmed aliens. It confirmed that the winged races like the Skypians and Lunarians are most likely from outer space and came down to colonize the One Piece planet. And it's even more crazy that we got all of these revelations during the post-Enies Lobby arc. Like, no one in the world does foreshadowing like Oda, I swear. And the fact that we get to see something that looks like the Mother Flame or the Eternal Flame from Egghead Island is just the cherry on top here. Alright, but what if I told you that there is actually another cover story that might, ironically enough, be even more important than Enel's, one that hid so many truths in plain sight for all these years that it kind of boggles my mind. Would you believe me? Because I think it's not Enel that shows us the most about the truth of the ancient One Piece world. The truth of it can actually only be found on the Ohara Patreon, where you can find tons of bonus content. All right, seriously, no, it's not Enel that reveals the truth. It's actually one of his priests. Specifically, we're talking about this fellow here, Gadatsu. And I know, it sounds absolutely insane, but I promise you'll see what I mean. So let's go over the facts. After Enel's priest Gadatsu falls down all the way to the Blue Sea, he meets a man named Goro who's attempting to dig some hot springs. And declaring now that he'll become the boss of the entire Blue Sea, good luck with that by the way, he helps Goro dig and eventually accidentally takes a pickaxe to a giant sleeping mole called the Earth Boss. He beats the Earth God in a fight and then the mole helps them dig and they eventually meet a monkey named the Forest Boss, who he also recruits. And together they dig all the way to the Yuba Oasis in Alabasta, where it's revealed that Goro was actually Toto's brother. And if you don't remember, which fair enough, I didn't either, Toto is Koza's dad, Vivi's childhood friend who led the revolution in Alabasta, in case you remember that. Anyways, together they create a hot spring resort with a giant crab operating as a taxi service to take Alabastians through the underground tunnel to the now newly established hot spring island, Ukari. Now, on the surface, this of course just seems like a silly little side story, but much like a giant mole, let's dig a little bit deeper here. First off, this giant tunnel proves that the island of Ukari and the totally separate island of Alabasta are actually connected underground. And this actually showed us many years ago that many of the islands in One Piece were once connected as a larger continent before the sea levels rose and one big landmass became little islands where, again, just the mountaintops stayed around. But it goes even deeper than just that. Let's look at 4 of the characters that we meet in the story. And of course, the ones that really jump out at us right from the start are the Earth Boss and the Forest Boss. Both of them, of course, share their names with the 2 gods mentioned in the Harley text that were first name dropped where? That's right, in Skypiea, where Gadatsu's originally from. So, if these 2 represent the Earth God and the Forest God, then who could be the Sun God and the Sea/Rain God? Well, Goro wants to create hot springs and is related to Toto, who spent his time in the Alabasta arc searching for water during the drought. So he's definitely our sea god. And Gadatsu fell straight out of the sky. So he's gonna be our sun god. And honestly, his weird hairstyle even does look a little bit like a sun if you squint hard enough, maybe. I don't know. So, could this cover story actually represent a miniature version of what we see in the Harley text on Elbaf and maybe even hint at how things will play out in the future of the story? As weird as it sounds, I actually believe that it does. Let me remind you, in the first world section of the Harley text, it states that the sun god appeared and the earth god was enraged. Now, this does line up pretty well with Gadatsu's battle against the mole. Then, in the second world, the forest god shows up and the sun god spreads war, very much like his battle against the forest boss. The sea god rages, and the Harley text says they will never meet again, much like how Alabasta and Ukari are separated by the sea level rise, but the Harley text then predicts that in the third world, a new dawn will rise and they will surely meet again, very much like how Gadatsu made it possible for Alabasta and Ukari Island to be connected, become one country once again. And could this not maybe even tell us something about how Luffy might maybe resolve the final saga and find the One Piece? Because for years, it's been a very big theory in the One Piece community that the One Piece is a way of breaking through the red line and reconnecting all of these separated oceans. And now that we know about the sea level rise, well, it could also mean draining some of the sea and reuniting the massive continents, putting them all back together in one Peace. And what does Luffy do after pretty much every single arc? He parties with everyone, often in a hot spring like in Alabasta and in Wano. So did Gadatsu's story really tell us a long time ago that Luffy would actually bring the power of the four gods back together in order to reunite the world? Could that connect to his secret dream that he shared with the Straw Hats? I mean, I really think that Oda might be out here hiding some of the biggest hints in the places that we'd least expect them, these goofy little cover stories. Alright, but if at this point you somehow still don't believe me that Oda has been hiding these huge secrets in the cover stories all along, then we now have to take a look at the very first cover story ever, The Adventures of Buggy's Pirate Fleet. That's right, folks. It all once again comes back to my boy Buggy. Did you actually think that the first time we saw characters hit the Nika pose was in Skypiea? No way. Oda has actually been cooking that stuff for way longer than we all thought. He gave us the Nika pose whilst we were still in the East Blue. On the cover page of chapter 47, 1,100 chapters ago exactly, that's weird, Buggy and Gaimon, the two most important characters in the series, have a bonfire and a lot of the animal hybrids on the island of rare animals dance around it, hitting, as you can see, the infamous Nika pose. So check and mate, dear non-believers. More so over, later on in chapter 59, we get to see Richie the Lion's Dream, and I'm gonna be honest with you, this page straight up blew my mind, man, because in Richie's dream, we see him wielding an Elbaf sun shield, a direct reference to the sun god and the symbol of the ancient kingdom, while fighting a monstrous black figure that looks just like one of the creatures from the Elbaf mural. And Oda, you just can't keep getting away with this stuff. Okay, but of course, this video doesn't even begin to cover all of the crazy secrets and lore hidden in that giant mural, so if you want to see my full analysis of what actually happened during the Void Century, and also if you want to dive back into the cover stories and see if you can find something, you should check out that video right here. Otherwise, thanks for watching, thanks so much to all the Patreons, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. I guess.